On April 4, 2024, following more than 2 decades on death row, a man named Michael Dewayne Smith met his end through lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. In this video from Bruised Voice, we explore the events that led to his fate, details surrounding his final hours including any meal he chose, and the words he spoke, or chose not to speak, before the procedure concluded. This account goes beyond a single act of violence. It traces a deadly sequence involving 3 lives lost, driven by a young gang affiliate who, over roughly 4 months, contributed to multiple fatalities in Oklahoma City. 2 of those deaths occurred on the very same day, targeting individuals who posed no real threat and were merely caught in unfortunate circumstances. Known in certain circles as Hoover Killer, or simply HK, Smith belonged to the Oak Grove Posse, a ruthless faction tied to the broader Crips network operating in the area. By the point authorities apprehended him, the harm he caused had already left lasting scars on the community. Michael Dewayne Smith entered the world on June 24, 1982, right here in Oklahoma. From his earliest years, circumstances weighed heavily against him. He came of age in an environment saturated with street conflicts and substance abuse, issues so pervasive they shaped daily life. His father battled severe alcohol dependency and directed physical violence toward his mother. When Michael reached just 2 years old, his parents parted ways, shattering any sense of stability. Lacking a consistent paternal presence, he navigated a turbulent upbringing. Older siblings pulled him toward early exposure to narcotics and gang affiliations. Education took a back seat. He faced ongoing academic difficulties and never established a solid foundation in school. Between 7 and 8 years old, Michael endured sexual abuse at the hands of an older female, an experience that remained buried and unaddressed for a long time. By age 10, he permanently lost his father, creating an emotional void that proved impossible to mend through conventional means. In response, he gravitated toward PCP, a potent dissociative substance that offered temporary relief from reality. By the arrival of 2000, at only 18, he had formally aligned himself with the Oak Grove Posse. Long afterward, during a telephone conversation conducted while still incarcerated and nearing the end of his appeals process, Smith looked back on his path with clear remorse. He acknowledged possessing natural athletic talent, particularly in sports, which he believed could have secured him a college scholarship and opened doors to a different future. Yet, immersed in a world dominated by fellow gang associates and a relentless atmosphere of aggression, he chose a different route, one he later described as the single greatest mistake of his existence. By 2002, Michael Dewayne Smith had become deeply entrenched in gang life. He faced warrants for 5 serious felony offenses: shooting with intent to kill, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, assaulting a police officer, attempting to escape police pursuit, and driving under the influence. At just 19 years old, his life was descending into chaos. To grasp the action Smith later took, it's essential to examine the events of November 8, 2000. That morning and evening, 3 associates from the Oak Grove Posse, a subset of the Crips in Oklahoma City, set out to commit armed robberies at 2 convenience stores in South Oklahoma City. The individuals involved were Taryn Teenock Armstrong, Kenneth Peanut Kinchin, and Dwayne Puggio Shirley. The initial holdup occurred smoothly around 10 a.m. at Coker's Corner on South Kentucky Street, where Kinchin wielded the firearm. The group then targeted a second location shortly after 8 p.m., Trans Food Mart on South May Avenue. This attempt ended tragically. Armstrong carried the weapon during the second robbery. When he threatened the store owner, a Vietnamese immigrant named Han Vo, also reported as Han Van Vo or Han Van Ho in accounts, the owner refused to comply. Han Vo retrieved a .38 caliber revolver hidden under the counter and fired, killing Armstrong instantly. Kinchin and Shirley escaped the scene but were later apprehended. Authorities charged both with felony murder and robbery with a dangerous weapon, among other counts. Han Vo faced no charges. Officials deemed his response lawful self-defense under Oklahoma law. Smith had no role in the robberies themselves. However, Taryn Armstrong ranked among his closest friends within the gang. When Smith came across a newspaper report detailing the incident, he grew furious. The article included statements from someone linked to a nearby business, the AZ Food Mart, remarks Smith interpreted as insulting toward the Oak Grove Posse and, more personally, as disrespectful to Armstrong's memory and legacy. Fueled by grief and rage, Smith resolved that retribution was necessary. 2 weeks after Armstrong's death, on November 24, 2000, Smith took initial steps toward violence. He joined forces with his 29-year-old associate David Walter Burns, Along with Melvin Moore and 26-year-old Otis Payne Jr., the group occupied an SUV parked outside the Lexus Club, a nightclub situated in northeast Oklahoma City. What began as an ordinary evening out rapidly escalated into deadly confrontation. The incident erupted into chaos inside the car. Michael Dewayne Smith passed his firearm to David Walter Burns, and then both individuals began shooting. Their intended target was Melvin Moore, but a lethal round instead hit Otis Payne Jr., who died immediately at the scene. Moore escaped with a non-fatal injury to his shoulder. Smith and Burns escaped the location swiftly. Law enforcement officials identified the pair promptly and obtained arrest warrants, yet Smith refused to surrender. He chose to disappear, slipping through the streets of Oklahoma City undetected as authorities intensified their search. For 3 full months he managed to remain elusive, always just beyond reach. As time passed, however, his anxiety grew increasingly severe. That mounting fear culminated in a burst of extreme violence on February 22, 2002. Early that morning, shortly after 6:30 a.m., Smith departed his residence at the Del Mar complex in Oklahoma City. His roommate, Marcus Berry, observed him seize a .357 caliber revolver before stepping outside. Smith had fixated on a specific individual, Philip Zachary Jr. In Smith's perception, Zachary had been providing details to detectives, drawing the net tighter around him. Convinced that Zachary was informing on him, Smith concluded that such betrayal demanded severe consequences. Upon reaching the residence where Zachary resided, Smith discovered the young man was absent. In his place was Zachary's mother, Janet Denise Miller Moore, aged 41. She worked diligently in the insurance division at University Hospital, known to colleagues and loved ones as a steadfast supporter, always ready with assistance, compassion, or encouragement for those around her. Family members remembered her as the dependable foundation of their lives, a woman whose warmth touched everyone she encountered. That particular morning, Janet was by herself in the apartment, preparing for her workday shift. Unaware of the danger approaching, she had no warning that a fugitive wanted for homicide was about to force entry into her home. Smith kicked the door open violently. Janet's terrified scream pierced the air as she cried out desperately for assistance, but the apartment remained silent except for her panic. No one else was present to intervene or respond to her pleas. In a later admission to authorities, Smith recounted the sequence with detached calm. He stated that her frantic reaction and continuous cries unsettled him, prompting him to fire a single shot into her chest. Janet fell to the floor mortally wounded. The woman was already gone the instant the shot rang out. Michael Dewayne Smith didn't panic or flee. He calmly moved through the apartment, methodically wiping every handle, surface, and edge he had touched, erasing any trace of his presence. When he later discovered the victim was Janet Miller Moore, the mother of Philip Zachary, the man he had actually intended to target, he just shrugged it off with a casual, "Oh well." But the rage inside him hadn't cooled. In his view, one final act of vengeance remained unfinished. By around 7:30 p.m. that same evening, only about an hour after Janet Moore's death, Smith stepped into the AZ Mart convenience store in South Oklahoma City. The shop sat right beside Trans Food Mart, the site where his close associate Taryn Tenoch Armstrong had been fatally shot more than a year earlier during a botched robbery attempt. Smith, a member of the Oak Grove Posse subset of the Crips gang, blamed the earlier killing on the store owner who had defended his business. He also harbored deep resentment over comments he believed someone from the neighboring store had given to local media, disrespecting Armstrong and the gang in print. Convinced an employee at AZ Mart had spoken to reporters, Smith arrived armed and determined to deliver retribution. Working behind the counter that night was 22-year-old Sarath Babu Paluru, an international student from Andhra Pradesh, India. Babu was the first in his family to pursue opportunities in the United States, driven by ambitions of higher education and a brighter future. Friends and family described him as warm, generous, full of life, and deeply motivating. His younger brother Harish later credited Babu as the inspiration for his own path to becoming a physician. Babu embodied hope and kindness. He was never the one who had spoken to any newspaper. In fact, he wasn't even scheduled to work that shift. He had stepped in as a favor to cover for someone else. It was a heartbreaking error of mistaken identity that would end his life in seconds. Smith entered the store and immediately confronted Babu at gunpoint. The young clerk, startled but composed, asked what he had done wrong. What offense could possibly justify this violence? Smith offered no reply. Instead, he raised his firearms and began shooting. He emptied both weapons into Babu's body, firing 9 rounds that struck his arms, legs, torso, and face. Even as Babu collapsed lifeless to the floor, Smith continued pulling the triggers until every chamber clicked empty. Still not satisfied, Smith retrieved a bottle of lighter fluid from the shelves. He poured it over Babu's motionless form, soaked the cash register area, and splashed it throughout the back storage space. Striking a match, he ignited the flammable liquid. Flames erupted quickly, racing across the small store as smoke billowed. Amid the growing inferno, Smith snatched cash from the register drawer and slipped out into the darkness. He returned to his residence, stripped off his blood-soaked clothing, and disposed of the evidence. That same night, Michael returned to his apartment in the Del Mar complex in Oklahoma City and confided in his roommate, Marcus Berry. He openly admitted that he had killed Janet Moore, a 41-year-old mother. A few hours later, in the early morning hours, he visited a female acquaintance named Sheena Johnson, who was 20 years old. Once again, he couldn't hold back the details. Michael explained to Sheena that he had gone to Janet Moore's apartment searching for her son, Philip Zachary, whom he believed had been informing to the police about gang activities. When he encountered Janet instead, she began screaming in panic. In his own words during that conversation, the woman refused to stay quiet, so he shot her to silence her. He then went on to describe the second incident. Michael confessed to Sheena that he had killed a man working at a nearby convenience store because he thought the clerk had appeared on television or in the news disrespecting his gang set. He provided specific details about how he had shot the victim multiple times, then poured lighter fluid over the body, the cash register, and parts of the back room before igniting the fire to cover his tracks. Unbeknownst to Michael, those precise details about setting the fires had not been released to the public by investigators. At that stage, law enforcement had not yet linked the two separate homicides together. Sheena now possessed information that only the perpetrator could have known. In time, she shared the full account with the authorities. 2 days later, on February 24, 2002, police apprehended Michael, though initially not in connection with the double homicide. They took him into custody for the earlier killing of Otis Payne Jr., stemming from a nightclub shooting that had occurred 3 months prior outside the Lexus Club in northeast Oklahoma City. Michael had been a fugitive in that case, where he admitted to handing the weapon to the actual shooter. Once in custody, detectives brought him in for questioning. At the outset, the focus remained solely on the Otis Payne matter. However, as the session progressed, Oklahoma City homicide detectives Janet McNutt and Teresa Sterling shifted their line of inquiry. They began pressing Michael about the recent deaths of Janet Moore and Sarath Babu Puluru, the 22-year-old convenience store clerk from India who had been working at the ANZ Food Mart in South Oklahoma City. Initially, Michael denied any involvement in those crimes. But as the interrogation wore on over several hours, his resolve weakened. He eventually broke down emotionally. On the recorded video footage, Michael Dewayne Smith provided a full confession to both murders. He stated that the killings were acts of retaliation tied to perceived wrongs against him and his family, connected to his membership in the Oak Grove Posse gang. He recounted arriving at Janet Moore's East Oklahoma City apartment early that morning of February 22, 2002, intending to confront her son over suspicions of snitching. When Janet opened the door and realized the threat, she panicked, screamed, and called for help. Michael explained that he shot her once because she would not calm down or stop making noise. He claimed he would not have fired if she had stayed quiet. Investigators later confirmed shoe prints and other evidence at the scene aligned with his description. Michael then detailed the subsequent attack at the ANZ Food Mart, located next to Trans Food Mart where a prior gang-related robbery had turned deadly in 2000, resulting in the death of his associate Taryn Armstrong. Believing Sarath Puluru had insulted or disrespected the gang in media comments related to that earlier incident, though Puluru had not actually done so and was merely filling in for the owner, Michael entered the store armed. He emptied ammunition from 2 handguns into Puluru's body, shooting him 9 times, despite the victim's confused questions about why it was happening. Afterward, he doused the corpse, the cash register area, and the back room with lighter fluid before setting everything ablaze in an attempt to eliminate evidence and destroy the scene. The evidence against Michael Dewayne Smith proved overwhelming in the courtroom. He confessed to police that he had carefully wiped down surfaces inside Janet Moore's apartment to eliminate any fingerprints he might have left behind. He acknowledged getting rid of the clothing he wore during the crimes to avoid detection. He also admitted to starting fires at one scene specifically to destroy potential evidence linking him to the acts. This confession stood out as thorough, logical, and deeply incriminating, recorded fully on video for authorities and later the jury to review. In March 2002, prosecutors in Oklahoma County filed formal charges against him: 3 counts of first-degree murder, plus burglary, robbery with a firearm, and arson. These stemmed from the violent events of February 22, 2002 in Oklahoma City, where Smith, already a fugitive wanted in connection with an earlier killing, carried out the shootings. His trial for the murders of Janet Moore and Sarath Puluru, also known as Sarath Babu Puluru or Sharath Puluru, opened on June 6, 2003 in Oklahoma County District Court. However, certain procedural mistakes occurred during proceedings, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial. Undeterred, the court scheduled a retrial, which commenced on August 28, 2003. This second effort proceeded smoothly without similar issues. The prosecution presented a powerful array of proof. Key witness Sheena Johnson testified under oath, repeating the full account Michael had shared with her privately, specific details only the perpetrator could possibly know. Another individual, Marcus Berry, took the stand and described how Michael had personally confessed to him about killing Janet Moore. Then came the pivotal moment. The jury viewed the recorded confession in its entirety. They heard Michael himself narrate the sequence of events, explaining his actions in chilling detail using his own voice and words. The defense team countered by claiming Michael had been under the influence of PCP at the time of his police interview. They argued the statements were coerced, involuntary, and therefore unreliable as evidence. The trial judge rejected this position after careful consideration. Officers who conducted the questioning described Michael's demeanor as confident, talkative, and fully alert. He appeared animated rather than confused, clearly comprehending the questions, his responses, and the serious legal ramifications involved. On September 11, 2003, after deliberating, the jury delivered their decision. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, guilty of robbery with a firearm, guilty of burglary, and guilty of arson. The verdicts reflected the strength of the state's case. 9 days afterward, the same panel, composed of 9 women and 3 men, convened again for the penalty phase. They recommended the death penalty for each of the 2 first-degree murder convictions. For the additional offenses, they proposed a total of 85 years in prison. On October 14, 2003, Oklahoma County District Judge Twilla Mason Gray formally imposed sentence. She condemned Michael Dewayne Smith to death for the murders. In her remarks from the bench, the judge addressed the victims directly, describing Janet Moore and Sarath Puluru as diligent, hard-working people who had no reason to suffer such violent ends. Given the extreme cruelty displayed in the crimes, she stated that capital punishment fit the circumstances. Janet Moore's son, Philip Zachary Jr., the very person Michael had initially sought out, mistakenly believing him to be informing on gang activities, spoke during the sentencing hearing. He expressed to the court that justice had finally arrived for his mother after the long ordeal. In March 2004, Michael returned to the same courthouse to answer for the separate November 2001 nightclub shooting death of Otis Payne Jr. outside the Lexus Club in northeast Oklahoma City. After a 5-day trial in Oklahoma County, the jury convicted Michael Dewayne Smith of second-degree murder in the 2001 shooting death of Otis Payne outside the Lexus Club in northeast Oklahoma City. The court imposed a life sentence for that crime, to run consecutively with his 2 existing death sentences from prior first-degree murder convictions. His accomplice in the Payne killing, David Burns, faced justice as well. Burns received 25 years for second-degree murder plus 5 more years for firearm possession. By age 21, Michael Dewayne Smith stood convicted in 3 separate homicides. He entered death row at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, where he remained for over 2 decades while fighting execution. Throughout those years, his legal team pursued multiple appeals, arguing issues including intellectual disability, claims that his confession was coerced, and inadequate representation by trial counsel. In 2007, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected his initial post-conviction challenge and affirmed both the convictions and death sentences. By 2016, the case advanced to federal court. Attorneys highlighted IQ test results ranging from 71 to 79, asserting these scores demonstrated intellectual disability sufficient to bar capital punishment under established standards. The federal judges, however, ruled against him, determining the scores exceeded the strict legal cutoff for such protection. Come March 2017, every appeal avenue had closed. Michael became fully eligible for lethal injection, although authorities had not yet scheduled a specific date. Even behind bars on death row, Michael encountered ongoing disciplinary problems. Prosecutors pointed to evidence that he stayed connected with gang associates inside the facility and on the outside. As late as 2019, guards discovered weapons hidden in his cell. State officials emphasized that he continued posing a serious risk to others, portraying him as an unchanged danger who never demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. In August 2022, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals issued execution warrants covering 25 death-sentenced inmates. Michael's name appeared among them. Authorities first set his execution for July 6, 2023, but later postponed it to April 4, 2024. On March 6, 2024, roughly 1 month before the appointed date, Michael joined a video hearing with the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. Over 15 minutes, he begged for mercy and clemency. He voiced profound regret and extended heartfelt apologies to the families devastated by his actions, particularly those of Janet Moore, the 41-year-old mother killed at her apartment, and Sharath Babu Paluru, the 22-year-old convenience store clerk shot later that same day in February 2002. Yet in that same plea, he took a step that severely undermined his request. He insisted on his innocence in the capital murders. Tears rolling down his cheeks, Michael declared, "I didn't commit these crimes. I didn't kill these people. I was high on drugs. I don't even recall the moment of my arrest." His lawyer, Mark Henriksen, presented arguments to the Pardon and Parole Board that Michael Dewayne Smith suffered from intellectual disability. He explained that prolonged heavy drug use had further impaired Michael's cognitive abilities over time. The attorney emphasized that the confession given to authorities occurred while Michael was under the influence of PCP, leaving him in a disoriented and unreliable state. Henriksen introduced fresh material indicating that certain individuals who testified during the original trial may have faced pressure or intimidation to provide their accounts. The state prosecutors rejected these points outright. They directed attention to the comprehensive video recording of Michael's confession, where he provided specific descriptions of the killings. Segments were shown in which he recounted the events with vivid and explicit particulars. Authorities highlighted that Michael had not only admitted his role to law enforcement officers but also shared admissions with Sheena Johnson and Marcus Berry, individuals with no apparent motive to fabricate stories against him. Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond spoke directly and firmly. He described Michael as a merciless perpetrator who had repeatedly acknowledged his actions across different settings. Drummond observed that Michael belonged to a small group, roughly 10%, of those on death row throughout the country who had taken multiple lives. Family members of Janet Moore and Sharath Babu Paluru attended the clemency proceeding in person. They urged the board members to reject any form of mercy. Sarath's brother, Harish Paluru, supplied a detailed written declaration. In it, he explained that Sarath had been the pioneer in their family to relocate to America, pursuing better opportunities. Sarath's example motivated Harish to pursue a career in medicine. As a young boy back in India, Harish remembered spending long periods inside public telephone booths, anxiously awaiting calls from his brother in the United States. He conveyed the ongoing anguish that weighed heavily on their parents each day since the loss. Harish concluded by requesting that the board allow the legal process to reach its intended conclusion without interference. After deliberation, the board members cast their votes, resulting in a decision of 4-1. The application for clemency was turned down. In the period immediately before the scheduled execution date, Michael pursued one additional effort to halt the procedure. His legal team submitted urgent requests to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, seeking to block the lethal injection. Those petitions were rejected on 4 separate occasions. On the morning of April 4, 2024, with only hours remaining until the planned time of death, Michael's attorneys presented a last-ditch argument to the United States Supreme Court. They contended that the confession lacked adequate independent verification from other sources to stand as reliable evidence. The justices declined to issue a stay of execution. The process would move forward as arranged. The evening prior to the procedure, prison officials presented Michael with the opportunity to select a final meal of his choosing. He refused the offer entirely. He expressed no interest in consuming anything at all. As the scheduled time drew near, Reverend Jeff Hood, serving as Michael's spiritual advisor, entered the execution chamber alongside him at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Hood would later recount that in those closing moments, Michael displayed visible emotion, tears streaming as he grappled with the gravity of the impending procedure. The process commenced at 10:08 a.m. on April 4, 2024. Michael rested secured on the gurney. The team leader inquired whether he wished to offer any parting statement. Michael's reply came succinctly, "Nah, I'm good." He then directed a few hushed words toward Reverend Hood. With his microphone deactivated, Those present among the media observers could not discern the content, but correctional staff subsequently disclosed that Michael had conveyed expressions of affection for his loved ones. At 10:09 a.m., administration of the initial medication began, a sedative known as midazolam. Observers noted an almost instantaneous physical response from Michael. His frame trembled momentarily, and he made a brief effort to raise his head off the surface before settling back. Following that, a sequence of brief, noticeable inhalations occurred, sounds akin to snoring or labored breathing. Officials from the prison would afterward attribute these to what appeared to be an episode resembling sleep apnea. By 10:14 a.m., a physician wearing a mask stepped into the chamber. The doctor administered several shakes to Michael's body and then announced that he was unconscious. Roughly 60 seconds later, Michael's breathing ceased to be observable. At 10:19 a.m., the physician re-entered to assess for any remaining pulse. Moments afterward, at 10:20 a.m., Michael Dewayne Smith was officially declared deceased. He had reached the age of 41. Reverend Hood, positioned near Michael for the duration, provided an account of the scene afterward. He observed a solitary tear tracing down from Michael's right eye following the apparent cessation of life. Hood characterized the entire execution as avoidable and unwarranted. In his view, the state of Oklahoma gained no additional security that afternoon compared to the morning prior. The sole change, he asserted, lay in a reduction of the state's moral standing. In the observation area, separated by one-way glass, Janet Moore's son, Philip Zachary Jr., and her niece, Morgan Miller Perkins, were present to witness the proceedings. For more than 2 decades, precisely 22 years, they had awaited this resolution. Following the completion of the execution, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond delivered prepared remarks representing the perspectives of the victims' relatives. Janet Moore's family included a prayer expressing appreciation. They extended thanks to the authorities for their unwavering commitment to achieving justice across those many years. They remembered Janet fondly in her various roles, as a devoted mother, a cherished sister, a caring aunt, a close cousin, and in their words, an angel whose presence remained felt. The authorities and officials declared that justice had finally been served. They stated that the memory of the victims, along with their lives and contributions, would endure long after the event. The family of Sharath Babu Paluru, often called Babu or Sarath, expressed profound sorrow over his killing. They remembered him as the vibrant heart of their tight-knit household, a young man whose loss left them utterly broken. They emphasized that he would always remain alive in their memories and hearts. They also conveyed appreciation that the legal process had reached its conclusion with accountability imposed. Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond spoke thoughtfully about those who were taken. He portrayed Janet Moore as a steadfast pillar for her loved ones, providing strength and stability through difficult times. He described Sharath Babu Paluru as an intelligent, kind-hearted individual with a giving nature, the first member of his family to travel to the United States in search of higher learning and brighter opportunities. Drummond highlighted the tragic injustice of their fates. Neither victim had committed any offense, and neither was the primary person the perpetrator sought. Janet Moore and Sharath Babu Paluru died solely due to tragic misfortune, being present in the incorrect location during a moment of extreme violence. That was the full extent of it, Drummond concluded, adding that he was thankful justice had at last prevailed. However, not all shared the view that true fairness had been achieved. Reverend Don Heath, who leads the Oklahoma Coalition to abolish the death penalty, presented an alternative viewpoint. He characterized Michael Dewayne Smith as a deeply troubled and susceptible individual who dealt with intellectual limitations and had been repeatedly let down by societal systems throughout his life. Reverend Heath remarked that Michael Dewayne Smith carried a heartbreaking background. As a 10-year-old facing borderline intellectual challenges, he endured the loss of his father, became heavily involved with PCP use, and later affiliated with a gang, leading to devastating outcomes by age 19. Heath stressed that everyone requires compassion at some point, yet Smith received remarkably little of it. He faulted Smith's legal team for poorly guiding him by urging a stance of complete denial rather than owning his actions. That choice, Heath argued, eliminated any possibility of receiving leniency or mercy from authorities. Smith had desperately needed understanding and pardon, but obtained neither. Michael Dewayne Smith became the initial individual executed in Oklahoma during 2024. His death marked the 12th execution in the state since capital punishment resumed in 2021, following a roughly 6-year pause triggered by multiple flawed lethal injection procedures that drew widespread scrutiny. Nationally, he was the 4th person executed across the United States that year. The narrative surrounding Michael Dewayne Smith involves cycles of aggression, profound bereavement, and irreversible decisions with permanent consequences. 3 lives, Otis Payne Jr., Janet Moore, and Sharath Babu Paluru, were permanently ended. Their relatives will bear the weight of that sorrow indefinitely. Michael Dewayne Smith, once a youth who aspired to athletic scholarships and a better future, instead followed a destructive course that ultimately demanded the highest penalty. What are your views on this outcome? Do you believe justice was truly achieved? Share your opinions in the comments below. After nearly 3 decades on death row in Texas, Darlie Routier still faces a death sentence for the capital murder of her son Damon. She is now 55 years old and was convicted in the stabbing deaths of her 2 young sons, Devin and Damon Routier. For almost 29 years, she has lived with the knowledge that Texas plans to carry out her execution by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit should her remaining appeals be unsuccessful. In this video from Bruised Voice, we explore the events of that tragic night, the key evidence that shifted suspicion onto a grieving mother who survived, the controversial graveyard video that influenced public opinion nationwide, and the ongoing debates among forensic experts that persist to this day. To grasp how Darlie Routier transformed from an ordinary suburban parent into one of America's most debated figures on death row, we must return to the pre-dawn hours of June 6, 1996, in the peaceful suburb of Rowlett, Texas, and the desperate 911 call that set everything in motion. It was June 6, 1996, at 2:31 a.m. in Rowlett, Texas. Emergency dispatchers answered a call that has since become one of the most scrutinized audio recordings in U.S. true crime history. The caller was a woman clearly in anguish. Her name was Darlie Routier, then 26 years old. "My babies are dying," she sobbed into the phone. She explained to the operator that an intruder had broken into their home while everyone slept downstairs. She said her young sons had been viciously attacked, and she had awakened to discover them seriously wounded. The emergency call ran for 5 minutes and 44 seconds. Law enforcement reached the scene shortly after. At the residence on 5801 Eagle Drive, officers encountered a horrifying sight that immediately sparked suspicion. 2 small boys lay on the family room floor, both bearing deep stab wounds. One boy had already passed away. They had been stabbed multiple times. One died immediately, while the other clung to life upon the arrival of help but ultimately succumbed. Their mother stood nearby, wounded and bleeding yet alert. Her throat bore a severe cut, and her arms showed slashes. Blood covered much of the area. She remained conscious and communicative. The home displayed clear marks of struggle, disarray, and terror. From that point, investigators shifted focus. The central mystery became not merely the nature of the violence, but who had caused it. Darlie Lynn Peck was born January 4, 1970, in Altoona, Pennsylvania. At age 15, she relocated to Lubbock, Texas, with her mother and stepfather. Her mother, Darlie Key, found employment at a Western sizzlin' restaurant. There, a 17-year-old named Darren Routier worked as a cook. He served as assistant manager and had been voted most likely to succeed in high school. Friends described him as reserved, diligent, and unusually mature. When teenage Darlie entered the restaurant, sparks flew instantly. She was physically mature for her years, with blonde hair, an attractive figure, and a winning personality, the full package as some might say. That very evening, Darren and Darlie went on their first date. They quickly grew inseparable. In August 1988, roughly 3 years after meeting, they married. Darlie was 18, Darren was 20. The future appeared bright. For a time, success followed them everywhere. Darren launched a company named TestNet, specializing in testing electronic parts. The business thrived, especially by 1995. TestNet generated around $500,000 in annual gross revenue, allowing Darren to draw a salary of $125,000 per year. The Routiers relocated to Rowlett, Texas, a prosperous area east of Dallas. They bought a handsome 2-story brick house on Eagle Drive and invested heavily in upgrades. Darren purchased a 1982 Jaguar and a 30-foot cabin cruiser for outings on nearby Lake Ray Hubbard. Darlie underwent breast augmentation to a 36 DDD size in 1992 and adorned her fingers with diamond rings. She maintained long, bleached blonde hair, long artificial nails, and a wardrobe of high-end fashion. To neighbors, the Routiers embodied the American dream. Yet they were more than their lavish exterior. Despite the flashy image, they earned genuine affection in the community. Darlie earned a reputation as a warm, cookie-baking homemaker who prepared food for neighbors facing difficulties. She once covered a mortgage payment for a friend battling cancer. Local children, some of whom later spoke positively of her at trial, enjoyed cookies she baked and parties she hosted. Devin Rush Routier arrived on June 14, 1989, soon after his parents' wedding. Damon Christian Routier followed on February 19, 1991. Then, on October 18, 1995, the couple welcomed their third son Drake. 3 handsome boys, a prosperous venture, a stunning residence. Outwardly, the Routiers possessed it all. Beneath that polished surface, however, tensions were emerging. Early in 1996, Darren's company encountered setbacks. Client orders declined. Income fell sharply. Debts accumulated rapidly. The family lagged at least a month on their mortgage payments. They owed the IRS approximately $10,000 in overdue taxes and carried $12,000 in credit card debt. Just one day prior to the tragedy, Darren sought a $5,000 loan for a vacation but was denied because of their unstable finances. If financial strain strained their relationship, it remained hidden from outsiders. Darren and Darlie avoided public disagreements. Darlie continued her spending habits unabated. She had even arranged a summer getaway to Cancun with female friends. The couple appeared committed to projecting an image of flawless family life, regardless of private challenges. Then came the journal passage that prosecutors highlighted during the trial. On May 3, 1996, only a month before the killings, Darlie penned a troubling note in what had generally been a positive diary. She struggled with postpartum depression following Drake's birth. The entry mentioned thoughts of suicide. She spoke directly to her 3 sons, asking forgiveness and urging them not to blame themselves for her potential departure. Prosecutors portrayed this as insight into her troubled mindset. Her supporters countered that it reflected the temporary despair many new mothers experience with the condition. Regardless of interpretation, that single entry became a pivotal piece of evidence against her. The evening of June 5, 1996, unfolded routinely in the Routier home. Darren and Darlie conversed late into the night, well past midnight. They shared a goodnight kiss. Darren then headed upstairs to the master bedroom. The night of June 6, 1996, in a quiet suburb of Rowlett, Texas, tragedy struck the Routier family home on Eagle Drive. 7-month-old Drake slept peacefully in his crib upstairs. Downstairs in the family room, his mother, Darlie, had been sleeping on the couch that week. Her 2 older sons, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, preferred camping out on the floor there since school ended for the summer. Darlie, a light sleeper often disturbed by the baby's movements overhead, chose to stay close to the boys. The television glowed softly in the dim room, casting faint light over the sleeping family. The house remained still until around 2:30 a.m. when chaos erupted. According to Darlie's account to police, she awoke to Damon touching her shoulder and crying, "Mommy! Mommy!" In the darkness, she didn't immediately notice her own injuries. She glimpsed a figure moving through the kitchen toward the garage and pursued him. In the utility room, she spotted a knife on the floor, apparently dropped by the fleeing man. She picked it up. On the 911 call, Darlie informed the dispatcher she had handled the knife, leaving her fingerprints, but hoped investigators could still recover the attacker's prints from it. She set the knife on the kitchen counter. Only then did she look down and see blood soaking her clothing. Her throat had been cut, and her arms bore slashes. She screamed for her husband, Darren, who was upstairs with the baby. She saw Devin and Damon motionless on the floor and spreading pools of blood. Desperate, she dialed emergency services. Police and paramedics arrived quickly to a horrifying scene. Devin lay lifeless, already gone. Damon struggled for breath but succumbed soon after. Darlie, bleeding profusely from her neck and arms, remained conscious and spoke clearly. She described the assailant as a white male about 6 feet tall, dressed in a black shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. She said he fled through the garage. Investigators examined the property. A window screen in the garage appeared cut, seemingly confirming an entry point for an intruder. The large kitchen knife on the counter, bloodied, matched one from the Routier kitchen's knife block, the largest in the set. Yet discrepancies emerged almost immediately, raising doubts about Darlie's version. The garage showed no signs of frantic escape. No blood trails on the floor, no disturbed items. The cut windowsill retained thick, undisturbed dust layers. If someone climbed through, dust would have shifted. Mulch in the flower beds outside remained pristine, with no footprints or trampled paths toward the backyard gate. Inside, circular blood drops dotted the kitchen floor. Such patterns form when blood falls from a stationary or slowly moving person, not someone running or pursuing an intruder. Luminol revealed Darlie's bloody footprints near the kitchen sink, suggesting she stood there bleeding for an extended period. Blood cleanup appeared evident around the sink. A vacuum cleaner lay overturned atop her bloody prints, with broken glass scattered over blood drops on the floor, indicating the glass shattered after the blood fell, hinting at scene staging. Darlie's actions during and after the 911 call drew scrutiny. Officers noted moments of eerie composure amid panic. She ignored the dispatcher's guidance to apply pressure to Damon's wounds. When paramedics rushed Damon away, she didn't follow or inquire about his destination. Instead, she repeatedly asked officers if her jewelry was missing. Hospital staff observed unusual demeanor from a mother who had lost 2 children. Minimal tears, emotional withdrawal, greater distress over her appearance and hair than the boys' deaths. Prosecutors portrayed this as inconsistent with profound grief, suggesting guilt instead. But the most striking element surfaced later, away from the crime scene. 8 days after the killings, the family gathered at the cemetery for what would have been Devon's 7th birthday. A local news station from Channel 5 attended to document it. Footage captured Darlie at the graves, smiling broadly, laughing, chewing gum, singing happy birthday, and spraying silly string over the headstones. Balloons floated, gifts sat nearby, and an airplane even flew overhead towing a happy birthday banner. Darlie seemed almost exuberant. Darren stood behind her, hands in pockets, head lowered, stepping back awkwardly as the silly string flew. Prosecutor Greg Davis found the video pivotal. He later remarked how shocking it seemed. Just a week after losing the boys, a full celebration unfolded at the graves. The clip aired locally, then became central to the trial, replayed repeatedly for jurors. Some viewed it 7 or 8 times during deliberations. Supporters of Darlie insist the footage was misleading. They say a private, solemn memorial with prayers and tears preceded the cameras. The silly string moment aimed to honor Devon's joyful spirit, celebrating his memory with happiness rather than endless sorrow. 4 days after the video broadcast, Darlie Routier faced arrest and charges of capital murder. The graveside celebration emerged as powerful prosecution evidence, swaying perceptions of her character and motives. The case divided opinions sharply. Evidence like undisturbed dust, blood patterns, and behavioral oddities pointed toward inconsistencies in the intruder claim. Yet questions linger about forensic handling and potential alternatives. Darlie maintains her innocence, asserting an unknown attacker committed the crime, with enduring controversy. Subscribe to Bruised Voice for more deep dives into real cases that challenge what we think we know. Hit that like button if this story gripped you and share your thoughts below. Do the facts point to guilt, or is there more to uncover? Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. The jury never viewed that footage. Instead, the vision of a mother gleefully spraying silly string across her slain son's graves became fixed in the public's mind. The trial of Darlie Routier started on January 6, 1997 in Kerrville, Texas. The location shifted from Dallas County because of overwhelming media attention. Kerrville sat in one of Texas's most conservative counties, known for frequent death penalty convictions. Leading the prosecution was Assistant District Attorney Greg Davis, supported by Toby Shook and Sherry Wallace. The defense came from Doug Mulder, a well-known local attorney whom the Routier family hired after mortgaging properties to cover his costs. From the outset, prosecutors portrayed Darlie Routier as a narcissistic, appearance-obsessed woman whose extravagant way of life faced threats from money troubles and parenting duties. No longer the striking blonde in the spotlight, she supposedly resented her son's drawing attention away and sought to reclaim it. They presented 38 witnesses to construct their indirect evidence case. Crime scene expert James Cron stated that clues pointed to the home interior being arranged artificially. Arriving around 5:30 a.m., he decided within about 20 minutes that Darlie committed the act. Bloodstain specialist Tom Bevel described patterns on Darlie's nightshirt. He explained that spatter on the back implied she lifted the knife overhead while pulling it from each child to strike again. This testimony proved highly damaging, implying she stood behind her boys, repeatedly stabbing as blood flicked from the blade onto her back. Prosecutors showed screen fragments from the sliced garage window discovered on a bread knife in the kitchen, proposing Darlie cut it herself to fake an entry. They claimed she used that bread knife for the screen and a bigger butcher knife for the killings. They proposed a monetary reason. Both boys held life insurance worth only $10,000 total, not covering even funeral costs over $14,000. The defense promptly noted this small sum and questioned why, if money drove her, she spared her husband Darren, insured for $800,000, and left her infant son Drake, then 7 months old, unharmed upstairs. Prosecutors lacked strong replies to these points, yet they relied heavily on the silly string footage, replaying it repeatedly. The defense emphasized insufficient proof against Darlie. No clear motive, no admission, no direct observers. Attorney Doug Mulder insisted to the jury that no logical cause existed for her to harm those children. They introduced medical and mental health specialists who supported Darlie's account of an unknown assailant. San Antonio Chief Medical Examiner Vincent DeMaio testified that the neck injury missed her carotid artery by merely 2 millimeters, the thickness of pencil lead. A fraction deeper and she would have died rapidly from blood loss. He viewed this cut as inconsistent with deliberate self-harm he had encountered. Its depth and risk made it unlikely for anyone faking harm to risk so close to the vital artery. However, Darlie Routier chose to testify, ignoring her lawyer's counsel. The move backfired. During cross-examination by Toby Shook, she faltered, weeping unpredictably, turning combative, and citing memory loss for crucial moments. Shook pressed her on this convenient, selective forgetfulness. Whenever incriminating details surfaced, she recalled fresh explanations. Jurors found her unconvincing. Her claimed amnesia appeared too selective, with new recollections emerging only to counter damaging points. The proceedings spanned almost 5 weeks. On January 31, 1997, jurors received the case and deliberated roughly 8 hours across 2 days, viewing the silly string clip 7 or 8 times. On February 1, 1997, they found her guilty of capital murder. 3 days afterward, on February 4th, they imposed death by lethal injection. She joined a small group of women on death row nationwide. Darlie's mother, Darlie Key, felt crushed. She later remarked that deliberations centered on silly string, adding, "Silly string is not a lethal weapon." Yet the silly string clip was not the sole issue in Darlie's trial. Hidden evidence existed that jurors missed, evidence that could have altered perceptions. Authorities secretly recorded at the gravesite while monitoring the Routier family. That recording captured events unseen by the jury. On the day of the notorious silly string event, the family first conducted a serious memorial for the boys. They prayed, wept, and mourned deeply. The light-hearted activity followed later, after official cameras ceased during the grieving portion. Legal worries over the covert recording kept that full tape from the courtroom. Jurors saw only the playful part, never the sorrow. Another lingering mystery involves a bloody sock belonging to Darren Routier, located in an alley about 75 yards from the home. It carried blood from both Devin and Damon, but none from Darlie. Prosecutors claimed she placed it there to simulate an escaping intruder. But a flaw arose. If she planted it after her throat wound, she lost considerable blood. Yet no trail of her blood appeared on the patio, fence, or alley. No external blood existed anywhere outside except on that sock. The timeline adds further doubt. Medical findings indicated Damon survived no longer than 9 minutes after stabbing, likely 6 or fewer. Darlie remained on the 911 line for 5 minutes and 44 seconds. The officer reached the scene right as the 911 call concluded and stayed with Darlie Lynn Routier for roughly another minute until emergency medical teams arrived. Damon was alive upon their arrival. Calculating the timeline, Darlie had merely around 2 minutes to fatally wound her 2 sons, move to the garage, slice the window screen, enter through it, leap over the rear fence, or exit via the gate, sprint barefoot approximately 75 yards along a shadowy alleyway to discard a blood-soaked sock, hurry the same distance back, re-enter the residence, inflict wounds on herself, wipe blood near the sink, arrange the scene to appear staged, and dial emergency services. 2 minutes. Could that sequence truly occur? Appeals launched soon after her conviction. Her appellate lawyers uncovered that the court reporter, Sandra Halsey, introduced over 30,000 inaccuracies into the trial record. Thousands of words vanished entirely. Portions of testimony appeared distorted, and full dialogues were wrongly captured. Nevertheless, appellate courts deemed the mistakes insufficient to justify retrying the case. The defense further contended that trial counsel Doug Mulder faced a conflict, having earlier represented her husband Darren in a separate gag order matter. This claim was rejected. In 2008, a court authorized DNA analysis on critical items like the bloodied sock, a nightshirt, and fingerprints from the location. Yet bureaucratic holdups have repeatedly stalled progress. In 2017, authorities realized evidence intended for transfer to the Department of Public Safety for examination had never left storage, remaining untouched for years. In 2018, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals remanded the matter to the trial court to assess DNA issues and additional assertions. In 2021, a judge directed further DNA examination on the sock and related pieces. In early 2024, a judge approved sock testing, mandating samples reach a human identification facility within 30 days. To date, those findings remain outstanding. Darlie Routier has awaited DNA outcomes for over 16 years. The analysis that might establish her innocence or affirm guilt stays unfinished. Other items still puzzle observers. A blood-stained fingerprint appeared on a coffee table at the scene. Testing in 2002 confirmed it matched no family member. Whose was it? Another print surfaced on the garage windowsill, supposedly the entry point for an intruder. It likewise excluded all Routiers. Expert Pat Wertheim later stated he could neither eliminate nor positively identify Darlie's right ring finger as its source. These unidentified marks linger without resolution, and one additional element has escaped thorough scrutiny. In spring 1996, months prior to the killings, Darren Routier approached his father-in-law regarding an insurance fraud scheme. He sought someone to stage a break-in at their home to claim payout. He later conceded to investigators he might have shared the idea with others, possibly including individuals tied to local vehicle theft operations. Might that scheme have escalated disastrously? Could Darren's proposed fake burglary have turned into a genuine tragic invasion? Darlie Routier has proclaimed her innocence for nearly 28 years. In 2018, ABC broadcast a documentary series titled The Last Defense, delving deeply into her situation. During it, Darlie addressed the damaging silly string footage from the gravesite. Devin wanted to be 7, she explained. She did what she could to fulfill his wish and celebrate him since he was gone. But no one knows how grief will manifest after losing 2 children. Her former husband Darren, who divorced her in 2011 yet still supports her innocence, appeared as well. It is not too late, he noted, because Darlie is not dead. The Darlie Routier matter poses profound, unresolved questions. Did a mother in a quiet suburb kill her sleeping young sons, then wound herself to disguise the act? Or did an attempted home invasion victimize her, compounded by hasty police conclusions and intense media coverage? The graveside video captured a woman smiling and spraying silly string, yet omitted preceding sorrow. Blood patterns implied scene manipulation, but failed to clarify planting a sock 75 yards distant without her own blood trail. Prosecutors alleged motive tied to insurance, though policies fell short of even burial expenses. Crucial DNA that could resolve everything awaits completion in a Texas lab. Today, Darlie Routier, now 55, resides on death row at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has not embraced her surviving son Drake since her 1997 conviction. He was an infant of 7 months when his brothers died. Now 30, he grew up seeing his mother via protective glass. Drake resides in Texas with his father. Darren has remarried but persists in seeking Darlie's freedom. He bears tattoos of her and their 3 boys. No execution is scheduled. DNA work proceeds. Darlie waits. Nearly 3 decades have passed in anticipation. Her mother, Darlie Key, visits often and has unwavering faith in her daughter's innocence. "I want my daughter home," she has declared, "and then we will mourn Devin and Damon together." Devin Rush Routier would be 36 now. He wished to reach 7. He only marked it at his resting place with silly string and balloons, captured on camera. Damon Christian Routier would be 34. Stabbed repeatedly in the back while asleep on the family room floor, his bloodied palm print emerged under luminol on the couch. In his last efforts, young Damon struggled upright, seeking escape and survival. He reached his mother's position. "Mommy, mommy," he called, his final words. Whether she preserved or ended his life remains a question lingering across the nation for almost 28 years. The Darlie Routier story endures. DNA examination continues. Court motions persist. The legal fight goes on. If this case has intrigued you and you want more deep dives into true crime mysteries like this one, hit that subscribe button on Bruised Voice, turn on notifications and drop a like. Your support keeps these stories alive. A 16-year-old true crime enthusiast from Rockwall recently challenged the Dallas District Attorney's office in court, seeking access to materials from the original proceedings. He aims to examine what jurors reviewed and grasp how they reached their verdict. Unresolved issues linger, with potential evidence awaiting analysis and a woman on death row insisting she is innocent. Did Darlie Routier kill her 2 young sons in their Rowlett home then? Craft a staged scene to mislead investigators? Or did a mysterious intruder break in that night in June 1996, fatally attack the children, Devin, 6, and Damon, 5, and leave their mother to bear the blame for nearly 3 decades? The answers may hide within the physical clues. A blood-stained sock discovered 75 yards away from the residence, a graveside video featuring silly string that stunned viewers nationwide, unidentified fingerprints never linked to anyone, and DNA evidence untouched for many years. Meanwhile, Darlie Routier continues her steadfast declarations of innocence from behind bars year after year. Justice hangs in doubt. Families still seek closure. The controversy persists. And Darlie Routier, once labeled the silly string killer, remains on death row, awaiting resolutions that might never arrive. If this case intrigues you, subscribe to Bruised Voice for more deep dives into real mysteries like this one. On September 25, 2025, after more than 15 years on death row, Blaine Keith Millam was executed by lethal injection in a Texas state facility. In this episode, we examine the case details, his final statement, and his last meal. To grasp how Millam reached that point, we must return to the morning of December 2, 2008. At 10:37 a.m. that day, an 18-year-old man named Blaine Millam placed a 911 call from a trailer on a remote road near Tatum, Texas. His opening words sounded emotionless and almost practiced. "My name is Blaine Millam and my daughter, I just found her dead." Roughly 20 minutes later, Sergeant Kevin Roy from the Rusk County Sheriff's Department reached the location. 2 ambulances were already present. Emergency medical technicians remained motionless at the entrance to the master bedroom. Upon looking inside, the sergeant immediately realized why they had halted. A small child lay motionless on her back. The scene Sergeant Roy witnessed made it obvious this was no natural passing or mishap. It was clearly a crime scene. Blaine Millam, then 18, shared the trailer with his fiancée, Jessica Carson, also 18. The infant was Carson's daughter from an earlier relationship, a 13-month-old girl named Amora. Her biological father was deployed with the military abroad. Millam had referred to Amora as his own daughter, proudly claiming her first word was "Daddy," and that it referred to him. Now the child was gone, and soon investigators would uncover that almost nothing Millam stated that morning held up to scrutiny. Millam and Carson were separated for individual interviews. What followed was a cascade of inconsistent statements that began to fall apart over the next several hours. Initially, Millam informed Sergeant Roy that he and Carson had left the baby alone in the trailer and walked up the road. They headed down the dirt path to speak with a fellow named Clark about clearing a patch of their property. The two were away for roughly an hour. Upon returning, they discovered the infant in that horrific condition. A Texas Ranger named Kenny Ray showed up and carried out a separate questioning of Millam. During this round, the account shifted dramatically. This time, the mother claimed the child wasn't discovered in the crib but inside a gap in the bathroom flooring where renovations were supposedly underway. The Ranger sensed deception right away. He confronted Millam directly, stating that nearly anyone would point the finger at the sole adult male present in the residence. Millam insisted he had no part in it. He even volunteered for a lie detector test, yet the inconsistencies were rapidly unraveling. Shane and Dwight from Clark Timber stated clearly they had no meeting scheduled with Millam on that date. Footage captured at a local pawn shop in Henderson revealed Blaine and Jessica exchanging a chainsaw along with a pneumatic hammer earlier that same morning. What drove a young pair to seek immediate funds on the very day their infant perished inside the home? That question pulled detectives into a realm far darker than anticipated. Once authorities secured the full account from Jessica Carson, the revelation surpassed all expectations. Jessica explained that Blaine convinced her their little girl, Amora, harbored a demonic entity. He even gave the spirit a name, Martha. According to him, the possession stemmed from divine frustration. God was weary of the baby deceiving Blaine, despite her being unable to walk or talk coherently. Such was the twisted worldview Blaine Millam built, and astonishingly, he persuaded Jessica to accept it. The cash obtained from that pawn transaction went toward hiring a clergy member for an exorcism ritual. Though raised in a Pentecostal household, Blaine's mindset darkened significantly in the lead-up to the tragedy. He grew obsessed with hidden spiritual forces, demon possession studies, and the notion that he and Jessica possessed unique supernatural abilities. Following his father's passing in September 2008, only 3 months prior, Blaine and Jessica purchased a spirit board to reach out to the deceased parent. A profound change took hold within that mobile home. Grief, heavy drug use, psychological struggles, or some combination thereof altered the grieving son who once wept for his dad into someone perceiving evil presences all around, even in the innocent features of a nonverbal toddler. The coroner's detailed findings formed the backbone of the state's argument. The report cataloged widespread trauma indicative of drawn-out mistreatment. Due to the sheer number of severe wounds, each potentially lethal on its own, the precise cause of death remained undetermined. Records showed the harm spanned a prolonged time frame leading up to the fatal moment. Later courtroom evidence fixed this window at about 30 hours. This isn't conjecture, it's what the forensic proof established during proceedings. Graphic specifics were shown to the jurors, but they require no reiteration. The critical point is the conclusion reached. This wasn't accidental nor a brief outburst. It constituted prolonged, intentional cruelty inflicted on a defenseless infant. One revelation the panel heard completely transformed perceptions of the entire matter. Blaine Millam had no business being in proximity to any youngster. Long before encountering Jessica Carson or the birth of Amora, he carried the status of registered sex offender, stemming from earlier crimes against minors. At the child's passing, he remained under supervision for those violations. His conditions strictly prohibited interaction with any minors beyond immediate relatives. Relocating from Longview to Rusk County to cohabitate with Jessica and Amora, he neglected to update his registry, a violation constituting a separate felony offense. Local officials in Rusk County remained unaware a convicted individual of that nature resided in the same dwelling as an infant, until it was too late. The safeguards collapsed entirely. Clear red flags existed, yet no one linked them. In the aftermath of the child's death, proof mounted swiftly against Blaine Millam. 9 days later, on December 11th, officers executed another sweep of the residence and located traces of blood on bedroom belongings. Subsequent testing verified the DNA matched the victim. 2 days after that, December 13th, Millam's sibling Teresa Shea came to see him at the detention center. Later that evening, she confided in her aunt about an urgent need to return to the property and remove something concealed beneath it. Alarmed, the aunt contacted Sergeant Amber Rogers immediately. Rogers secured the necessary warrant and personally searched beneath the structure. Wedged through an opening in the bathroom subfloor, she recovered an implement concealed in transparent plastic. Lab examinations tied that object conclusively to the offense. Blaine Millam had attempted concealment and even enlisted his sister in the effort. Roughly 1 month following apprehension, in January 2009, an incident unfolded at the Rusk County facility that became the prosecution's strongest pillar. A nurse named Shirley Broyles worked there. Blaine summoned her one afternoon. Arriving at his cell, she observed him in tears. He passed her a formal note requesting a meeting with Sergeant Rogers, then uttered the phrase prosecutors described as an impeccable admission, "I'm going to confess. I did it." Yet he quickly added, "But Miss Shirley, the Blaine you know didn't do this. My father told me to act like a man and I've been studying scripture. Please let Jessica know I care for her." Those simple words, "I did it," rang out clearly. The defense contended the statement was pressured and that Millam's cognitive limitations prevented full comprehension. Jurors, however, accepted its authenticity. To grasp the defense position, one must examine Blaine Millam's background prior to the crime. Born the youngest of 4 in a household facing hardship, his father fell seriously ill and could no longer earn income starting in 2004. His mother juggled multiple positions to survive. Around 4th grade, Blaine was withdrawn from regular schooling under the pretense of homeschooling, though virtually no instruction occurred. A sibling later described his handwriting as nearly illegible and his reading limited to large print materials. Subsequent evaluations placed his intelligence quotient at 68 and 71. Figures hovering near the boundary many specialists associate with intellectual impairment. An expert in forensic psychology, after extensive sessions totaling nearly 10 hours, diagnosed him with significant cognitive deficits, amphetamine addiction, and psychosis triggered by substance abuse. Toxicology results on the day of the incident revealed methamphetamine levels tenfold above safe therapeutic amounts. Defense counsel portrayed Blaine not as inherently evil but as a severely limited individual whose life unraveled through addiction and distorted thinking. Prosecutors countered that view sharply. They dismissed the impairment claim as mere deflection rather than genuine insight. Despite alleged limitations, Blaine had maintained employment, starting at age 15 in an automotive service role for 2 full years, then advancing to diagnostic and repair duties at a tire facility. Post-incident, he demonstrated clear awareness by concealing items and fabricating several alibis. He even persuaded his sister to recover the hidden implement. Above all, they emphasized the confession itself. "I did it." Those 3 syllables, prosecutors argued, belonged to someone fully aware of his actions. Ultimately, the state's position remained direct. Blaine Millam was a dangerous individual who exploited a susceptible young mother and her vulnerable child. If this story gripped you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. For more chilling true crime breakdowns, check out Bruised Voice, your source for the raw, unfiltered truth behind the headlines. Stay safe out there. The case centers on a horrific crime that unfolded in a small East Texas trailer, where a young child lost her life in a brutal act disguised as a spiritual ritual. What happened to little Amora was no tragic accident during an attempted deliverance. It was calculated, prolonged violence that ended in murder. The man at the heart of the crime, Blaine Keith Millam, faced trial amid intense local attention. Because of widespread media coverage and community awareness in the Rusk County area, authorities relocated the proceedings roughly 140 miles south to Montgomery County. The trial opened in January 2010 and stretched across several weeks. Jurors listened to detailed medical testimony from prosecution experts. They examined forensic proof that directly linked Millam to the scene and the injuries. His own recorded confession was read in open court, laying bare the sequence of events. The defense team countered with their own specialists. They contended that Millam suffered from significant intellectual limitations, severe mental illness including active psychosis, and a sincere, if delusional, conviction that he was expelling a demon. They urged the jury to return a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. After hearing everything, the jurors needed less than 60 minutes to reach their decision: guilty of capital murder. In the punishment phase, additional facts came to light. Millam's previous criminal history, his status as a registered sex offender, his failure to comply with registration requirements, and the probation conditions he broke simply by being present in that residence with a vulnerable child. The panel sentenced him to death. At that moment, Blaine Millam became the youngest inmate on Texas's death row. His girlfriend and the child's mother, Jessica Carson, stood trial separately in April 2011. The central issue was never whether she personally delivered the majority of the blows. Evidence indicated she had not. Instead, the focus rested on her legal responsibility as a party to the offense under Texas law. This doctrine holds that individuals who encourage, aid, or knowingly fail to intervene in a crime can face the same punishment as the principal actor. Prosecutors emphasized that Carson had remained inside the trailer for the duration of the prolonged abuse. She never summoned emergency services. She made no attempt to halt the violence. Testimony placed her there from start to finish. They further alleged that she had originated the exorcism concept, not Millam, citing her detailed statements to investigators, including references to a supposed demon named Martha. Her attorneys portrayed her as another casualty in the situation. They introduced evidence of her own trauma history, including diagnoses of post-traumatic stress disorder and battered woman syndrome, claiming she had been dominated and manipulated by an abusive partner. The jury was unpersuaded. After deliberating under 2 hours, they convicted Jessica Carson of capital murder. Since the state had chosen not to pursue the death penalty against her, she received the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without any chance of parole. She continues serving that term today. Following his conviction, Blaine Millam remained on death row at the Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, for nearly 17 years. His appeals turned the case into a prolonged legal battle centered on two major constitutional questions: claims of intellectual disability and the reliability of certain forensic techniques used at trial. In 2002, the United States Supreme Court had established that executing individuals with intellectual disabilities violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Millam's lawyers repeatedly submitted evidence showing his IQ scores fell within the range that should bar execution. Courts, however, consistently ruled against those claims. Over time, multiple psychological evaluations occurred. Notably, after Millam was removed from methamphetamine use while incarcerated, several of his cognitive test results improved significantly. The second line of attack challenged specific forensic methods employed during the original investigation. Defense counsel pointed out that some of those techniques had later faced serious scientific scrutiny and criticism. While judges recognized the ongoing debate in the field, they concluded that even excluding the contested evidence, the remaining proof of guilt remained overwhelming. The detailed confession corroborating physical items recovered, DNA findings, and Jessica Carson's own statements implicating him. Millam's execution was scheduled 3 separate times. The first, in January 2019, received a last-minute stay just 24 hours prior so courts could further examine the intellectual disability arguments. A second attempt in January 2021 was halted after a key state expert reversed his earlier assessment of Milam's mental functioning. By 2025, however, every avenue of appeal had run dry. A final execution date was set for September 25th. In the lead-up, his legal team filed an emergency petition with the U.S. Supreme Court, asserting that the conviction relied heavily on discredited forensic science and even suggesting Milam's actual innocence, with Carson as the primary culprit. On September 22, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected his last state-level motion. That same morning, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. Hours later, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously refused to grant clemency. No further reprieves were possible. That afternoon, Blaine Milam was moved to the Huntsville unit. Officials noted he seemed nervous and reported suffering from a headache. His requested final meal consisted of a cheeseburger, French fries, green beans, pinto beans, scrambled eggs, sausage patties, biscuits, and iced tea, a collection of familiar, comforting dishes that perhaps evoked memories of simpler times. He consumed it fully aware that only a few hours remained. At 6:19 p.m., he was secured to the gurney. Intravenous lines were placed in his right hand and left arm. Among those present to witness the procedure was Michael Jamerson, the original Rusk County prosecutor who had handled the case from the beginning. In his final statement, Milam expressed gratitude to those who had supported him, thanking them for their kindness, compassion, and love. He acknowledged the prison chaplain and shared that he had accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior. He then addressed the viewing room directly. "If any of you would like to see me again, I implore you to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and we will meet again. I love you all. Bring me home, Jesus." He made no reference to the victim. He offered no apology. Moments later, the lethal injection of pentobarbital began. He emitted a single grunt, followed by a gasp. Soon he was breathing in quiet snores. Within roughly 2 minutes, all motion ceased. At 6:40 p.m., Blaine Keith Milam was officially declared deceased. Afterward, District Attorney Michael Jamerson spoke to reporters, reflecting on the long journey. 17 years ago, a convicted sex offender removed himself from the circle of humanity. An entire team of attorneys has now circled back to the very arguments the jury rejected long ago. For many involved in the prosecution, the execution represented long-delayed accountability. Others viewed it differently, as a profound loss. Here was a man marked by documented cognitive challenges, failed repeatedly by social services, education systems, and mental health support, ultimately put to death by the state. The reality sits in a gray space between those perspectives. Blaine Milam grew up amid poverty, neglect, limited schooling, and unaddressed psychological struggles. He once wept at his father's passing and attempted to reach him through a Ouija board. Yet he was also a registered sex offender who deliberately violated probation terms to gain proximity to a child, and he later confessed to taking a baby's life. Jessica Carson will remain behind bars for the rest of her days. Blaine Milam has now met his own end. But Amora remains gone forever. 17 years have passed since she was taken. She never took her first steps. She never sat in a classroom. She never had the chance to grow. Her very name signified love. She was called Amora because she was meant to be loved. Instead, she died at the hands of those entrusted with her care. This story holds no true victors. Only a child denied life, a mother condemned to lifelong imprisonment, and a man who perished on a gurney in Huntsville. Whether justice prevailed depends entirely on your definition of the word. If justice equals holding wrongdoers accountable, then yes, both were convicted and punished. If justice requires preventing such horrors, then clearly no. Every red flag was visible. A known sex offender, an ignored probation breach, a fragile young mother, and defenseless infant. And the system failed to connect those warnings in time. If justice means restoration or healing, it is forever out of reach. No verdict can return Amora. The least we can do is honor her memory by saying her name, Amora. If this tragic story touched you, consider subscribing to Bruised Voice for more in-depth explorations of justice, heartbreak, and the cases that linger long after the headlines fade. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time.